Hi, I'm Kevin Hatley and welcome to Kevin Hatley Photography in my office. This is a channel that I've set up to share my experiences of wildlife and nature with others. So let's go. Standing on the banks of this river takes me back to my younger days when, as a young boy, my dad taught me how to fish on the River Devon and the River Allen in central Scotland. And during those trips I would be really lucky if I saw a brilliant blue flash come flying straight across the top of the water, very fast and very slow. And then if I was really lucky, sometimes it would actually stop and it would sit on a perch or on a branch and it would start fishing too. So what I want to do in this video is I want to share with you my experience of how to photograph kingfishers. And what we'll do is we'll look at where to find kingfishers, how to identify them, we'll look at some of the behaviour, and then I'll go through my approach to photographing kingfishers. And then finally what I'll do is I'll share with you what I consider to be my top 5 tips on how to photograph kingfishers. So how do you identify kingfisher? Well, kingfishers are a striking mix of electric blue and red, orange, metallic copper colours to it. It's an absolutely beautiful looking bird and it's pretty unmistakable. But there are one or two differences between the sexes. First of all, we'll look at the male. The male is bright blue in colour on the back and the top, orange underneath, and he has orange legs and a completely black bill. And that's important when it comes to then when we look at the female. Again, the same colours as the male on the top of the striking blue and orange and red colour and the orange feet. But the difference comes with the female and the lower bill. The lower bill in the female is a sort of bright orange red colour. And there is a saying that female kingfishers wear lipstick, and that's how to tell the difference between a male and a female kingfisher. When it comes to the juvenile is sort of more a greenish colour on the upper parts and darker colours on the under part, and it's got greyish legs. And if you look on the juvenile, it has a little white tip to the end of its bill, and that's quite important when we look at kingfishers in general. All kingfishers have white cheeks and a white throat. Remember the little white tip on the end of the bill in the juvenile. That's important because when the adults come into the nest cavity to feed, it's completely dark in there, and that little white tip is the aiming mark, and the white cheeks and the white throat on the adult kingfishers is the aiming part for the juveniles for when they're feeding. Kingfisher doesn't have a song, it has a call, and you'll often hear a kingfisher before you'll see it, and that's why it's important to know what the call is. The call is a high-pitched call which can be heard over long distances, and that's what it's designed for. Very often you'll be sat waiting, nothing, and that's part of the game with kingfishers. It is a waiting game. There's absolutely nothing, and the next thing you'll hear the call, the high-pitched sound, and the next second the bird will be in front of you. But as I've said, if you think hearing or seeing a kingfisher is difficult, photographing them, as you're about to find out, can be more difficult. But with the 5 tips I'm going to cover with you, hopefully that will help you get the images you're after. Where are you going to find kingfishers? Kingfishers can be found on pretty much virtually all stretches of open water, things like rivers and streams, lakes and ponds, canals, places to go to find them, or locations, RSPB reserves, wildlife trust nature reserves, or there are commercial hides where you can pay to actually get up very close to kingfishers. Kingfishers themselves normally, as a minimum, have a territory of about a kilometre. So you're talking about a river, stretch of river like this, you're talking about a minimum of about a kilometre for the size of its territory. But that all depends on the number of kingfishers in the area and the amount of food that's available. Okay, so what do kingfishers eat? What's their diet? Well, kingfishers eat mainly fish, mainly things like minnows and sticklebacks, but they'll also eat things like tadpoles and newts and aquatic insects like dragonflies and dragonflies. And really what you're trying to do when you're looking for kingfishers is try and find a source which has a good supply of small fish for the kingfishers to feed on. Tip number 5 in how to photograph kingfishers is recce. We were the same when I was in the army, that time spent on reconnaissance was seldom wasted. And it's a very true saying. What you've got to do is you've got to try and establish if the kingfisher does have a presence on the stretch of water that you're looking at. And the only way you're going to do that is by doing a reconnaissance or a recce. As I said earlier, one of the most important things to know about the kingfisher and identifying them is the kingfisher's call, because you'll often see one before you will often hear one before you actually see one. So it's important to know the kingfisher's call. And what you're actually looking for are things like suitable perches where the kingfisher will come into land and fish from, overhanging branches and bushes. Just have a scan around to see if there are any signs. Other signs you'll find are kingfishers drop-ins, which are normally clear white or brilliant white, but in a long straight line on any perch that it may have landed on, and also things like fish scales where the kingfisher may have bashed its prey before eating it. So tip number 5 in how to photograph kingfishers is recce. One thing's for sure is that kingfishers are tuned into movement, and if you want to get up close to a kingfisher, you're going to have to use a hide or some sort of hide. Now there are a number of different hides that are available. I've got this, my own pop-up hide, which I'll use on stretches of water, but you need to be careful and make sure you've got the landowner's permission to go on the land and put a hide up. You will also get the permanent built hides on nature reserves. There are a few in my area where kingfishers are seen quite regularly. You could, and they're free, you could go to a commercial hide, but they can turn out to be expensive. And then the final option is to go freestyle with your own personal camo, wandering up and down, trying to find perches or positions where you know kingfishers are going to fish from. And that's the key to it. And you need to make sure if you're using your own hide that it faces a good perch. So tip number 4 is to use a hide. Okay, tip number 3 in how to photograph kingfishers. It's all about perches. If you know a good perch where a kingfisher regularly goes to fish, then you're on a winner. Kingfishers will perch from tree branches, sunken logs. They will even accept perches that you as a photographer want to introduce yourself. Once a kingfisher finds a readily supply of fish to fish on, it will return back to that perch time and time again. So you can introduce a perch. So what I'll do is, on this stretch of water here, there are a number of natural perches in the river, but the backgrounds are quite cluttered. It's great getting a picture of your kingfisher, but when you get back to the computer and look at it, sometimes the background could spoil it. So you want to try and find a perch that offers a good background as well to give you a nice clean image. So tip number 3 is, in kingfisher photography, it's all about perches. Okay, tip number 2 in how to photograph kingfishers is got everything to do with the background. When I first started out in wildlife photography, I was always keen to get a picture of the subject that I was after. And that should be the case. If you've never photographed a subject before, you need to get that record shot. However, once you get back to your computer and you look at your pictures, you often find that if you haven't taken the background into consideration, the picture isn't as good as it could have been. So how do we go about making sure we get a good clean background? What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a slide, and I'll explain to you what it means. It's all about separation of your subject, in this case the kingfisher, from the background. The greater the distance from the kingfisher to the background, the softer the background will be, and you should get a nice clean background so that your kingfisher pops out. So in basis, the distance between you, the photographer, and the kingfisher, the distance from the kingfisher to the nearest part of the background should be at a minimum twice the distance between you and the kingfisher. That's the minimum. But the greater the distance between the kingfisher to the background, the greater that you're going to have a good clear background to your image, and your kingfisher should pop. So tip number 2 is think about your background. So what I want to do is just look at the equipment that I recommend, the method that I go through for photographing kingfishers, especially when they're fishing, and then we'll look at some images as well. So when it comes to equipment, I have a Canon R5 fitted with an RF 100 to 500mm zoom lens. I'm not going to talk about the specific settings of the Canon R5 or the lens. I'll just talk about basic settings for all cameras. So in addition to the camera and lens, you need a tripod. Kingfishers are very fast. You need a tripod to get the shutter speeds to get the images that you're after. A remote. What I'll do is I'll show you a clip of a kingfisher actually fishing from the second that it leaves the perch to the second it lands back on the perch with a fish in its beak, in its bill. You're talking less than 2 seconds. So you need very high shutter speeds, and you need a high frame rate as well. On the Canon R5, if I go into electronic mode, I can get 20 frames a second. On mechanical mode, 12 frames a second, and you need it for kingfishers when they're diving for fish. Okay, we've got the equipment set up. How are we actually going to prepare the setup so that we're ready to photograph the kingfishers? So as I said, you need a tripod mounted lens and camera with a remote control. What you need to do is you need to pre-focus using manual focus on the perch or the place that you think that kingfisher is going to enter the water. You need to manually focus on it. You need to set it to your maximum frame rate. In this case, on the Canon R5, electronic shutter speed 20 frames per second. I set it to a minimum, absolute minimum shutter speed of 1/3200th of a second. You've seen from the clip, less than 2 seconds, the kingfisher's in the water and it's out. I then set it to auto ISO, and I set my aperture to f8 for when they're fishing. Top tip: you need to watch for the telltale sign that the kingfisher will give you before it actually dives into the water. And what that telltale sign is, and if you watch the clip in slow motion, you'll see the kingfisher with its head like that, and it'll bring its head back, it'll point its head forward, it'll bring its head back, point its head forward, and what it's doing is it's actually judging the depth of the water and where the fish is, and then the next thing it'll just go. So that's the telltale sign you're looking for. As soon as you see that sign, you need to hit the remote and you need to keep firing. Don't let go, just keep firing as many shots as you can, and then just hope that when you look at your camera, your depth of field has been correct and you get the sharp shots that you're after. I'm going to finish off now with tip number 1 for photographing kingfishers, and that's patience. You really do have to be patient. You can't just expect to turn up on a riverbank or at a nature reserve and the kingfisher is going to just turn up like that. It doesn't work like that. It can be very frustrating at times, and I've had to put a lot of time and effort into getting the images that I have. Now, when it actually comes to images itself, I'm going to recommend there are 5 images I would say that you want of a kingfisher. I'll talk about shutter speeds. When I talk about shutter speeds, I'm talking about minimum shutter speeds, absolute minimum shutter speeds. The first one is a static kingfisher. As I said, they'll often land on a perch. They don't start fishing straight away, so you've got time. So I'd say the minimum shutter speed, you're looking at 1/250th of a second shutter speed. Aperture of about 7.1, which is the widest on the RF 100 to 500 that I have. The next image that you want is a kingfisher in flight. For a kingfisher in flight, you're talking about a minimum shutter speed of 1/3200th of a second, and you need to open up your aperture just a little bit to about f8, And I always shoot in auto ISO for all my images, always in auto ISO. So Kingfisher in flight, 1/3200th of a second, f8 auto ISO. Next one is the Kingfisher diving. Again, minimum shutter speed, 3200th of a second, aperture f8 and auto ISO for Kingfisher diving. Next picture you're looking at, picture number 4, is the Kingfisher with a fish when it comes back to its perch. Now, when that gets back to its perch, it's normally covered in water and it's flapping about and it's bashing the fish on the perch itself. You need to up your shutter speed to about 1/1000th of a second. So, with a fish, 1/1000th of a second. Again, aperture of f8 and auto ISO. The final image that I want to talk about is a portrait image of the Kingfisher. Me personally, I think that this picture of a Kingfisher is the top shot of a static Kingfisher. And what you're looking to do is get the back of the Kingfisher slightly on so that you can see the depth of the blue and the black. And the blue band that comes down the centre of the Kingfisher is a slightly different shade of blue than on the shoulders and the wings. And then you've got the orange of the chest, got a nice sharp eye, nice clean bill, and it's sharp and in focus. So what I want to do now is just leave you with what I consider some of my best images of Kingfishers, and I hope that you enjoy them. Okay, thanks for watching this edition of Kevin Hatley Photography and How to Photograph Kingfishers. I'm sure you agree they're a truly beautiful, magnificent looking bird, and I've really enjoyed this project and sharing it with you. All I would ask is that if you liked it, could I ask you to hit the like button? Also, could I ask you to consider subscribing to my channel, Kevin Hatley Photography. It's completely free, it doesn't cost anything, and it just keeps giving me that incentive to keep coming out to beautiful places like this in the English countryside and photographing the wildlife and nature, and then being able to share it with you. So until the next time, stay safe, take care, and I hope to see you soon. Bye for now.